Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process and for authors to learn valuable tips on producing and marketing your audiobooks. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Earlier today, I led a free audiobook Q&A session. And so for this episode of Audiobook Connection, I'm going to share with you that episode. Mostly we talked about an overview of the audiobook production process, and then at the end, some of my thoughts about how and why we should do our distribution and sales and marketing consciously, why it matters, and how we can achieve that. Not only for audiobook authors, but also for audiobook listeners. Here we go. So we're going to talk a little bit about audiobook production. So we'll start there because that's usually the beginning of the process once you have a completed manuscript. And so the first thing I want to highlight is how important pre-production is. And this is the phase of the process where we're thinking about who's going to voice the audiobook, whether that's you as author or whether that's a professional narrator. So casting in one direction or the other. And it's also about the manuscript preparation. And one of the really cool things about manuscript preparation, and still astounds me that most companies just don't even pay any attention to it. But it's like that's where I think a lot of the gold is, where the magic happens, because we're crafting the experience for our listener. So as we look at the manuscript, we think, well, what do we want our listener to experience? Do we want them to visit your website at some point? Yeah, probably, right? Because that your website is sort of your marketing hub. That's the place where you can let them know more about you and let them know what other books you may have available, any services or whatever. The whole thing is about, I think, is about community and building that engagement and that community over the long term. So one of the best ways to do that, and the ways that authors have the most control over that, since social media is not in our control. Yes, we can post things on it, but we don't have control over whether it disappears someday, who gets to see it, any of that. So our websites are our best place. So with a nonfiction book, many times there are multiple opportunities within the audiobook itself that may arise where those are good, logical, helpful, user-friendly, user-welcoming moments to invite people to your website. For example, if you have any visuals that the listener would benefit from seeing, what a great time to not only explain what the visual provides and give them the information, don't cheat them, right? But give them that information, but then also invite them to your website so that they can see it and then make sure it's there for them when they get there, right? And that's just like one example. Let me give a couple others that can cross over between fiction and nonfiction pretty easily. One is at the end of the audiobook, as so they've listened through the whole thing. Typically, one of the first impulses for a listener is, I want to connect with that author, right? Because they feel like they've had this journey with you. And then one way is to share a sneak preview to another book if you have one, right? And it doesn't have to even be finished. You might not have even finished writing it. Maybe you wrote the first chapter or have a first draft of the first chapter, but enough that you feel really good about it. You could include a sneak preview. Another, and this is one of my personal favorites, and that is to include a part of an interview. So the way we do this for our production clients is I will typically, for my podcast, I will interview the author, and then we'll include the first part of that interview as a bonus material. We don't include the whole thing. We invite them to the website, the author's website, to hear the full thing. Now you're right in the middle of this interactive experience. Of course, you're going to want to go hear the rest of it, right? So it's a good way, a warm, welcoming way to invite people over to your website. And those two options for bonus material both work really well for both fiction and for nonfiction. So the whole idea, again, is to craft that listener experience during pre-production and the manuscript preparation. And so then that is the first phase of that project. It's getting it ready. And then once it's all ready, then you move into production. Now, when I say the word production, I am including in that, for those people who have more either audio or video production experience, they might separate out and consider separately post-production. I'm wrapping it all in because most authors don't have that kind of background. So I include that all. And what that includes is whether the author or whoever's going to narrate it, one or more people, is going to do that first recording. Typically, this is an industry standard. They're going to include they're going to record about the first 15 minutes. And then the author will get to listen to that, make sure that they're on the right track, that they're feeling good about that. If there's anything that seems amiss, whether it's pronunciations or tone or any of that, that's the moment for an author to speak up and say what they want, because it's sad and frustrating if you as the author don't speak up at that point, and then you end up not happy with the product at the end, and that doesn't make anybody happy because everybody should want a really quality experience at the end. And at the end is the time when, they've done all that work and now you're not happy with it. So really the best time is to give the feedback that you want to give in the beginning. Once that first 15 is approved, then the the narrator is approved to move forward and will record the rest of the audiobook. There are other things that technically fall within that pre-production phase, such as making sure that the pronunciations that you want, let's say, for example, you have a character who's named Stefan. It's spelled like Stephen, but you really want it to be Stefan. Well, you better make sure that the narrator knows that, right? There can be any number of other things that all are prepping that were part of that pre-production. But then once the recording is completely done, then it's going to go through the editing phase. And different companies are going to have different approaches. So I can really best speak to what we do at Pro Audio Voices. We have a human editor who is going to, go through and listen and make sure it's all good to go. And full transparency, in addition to the human editor, we also use an AI pass. We're human, and human is good. And humans, we also sometimes will miss something, right? So it gives us that extra layer of a check on whatever. So, and that system that we use also provides an easy platform for authors then to listen to the edited audio and to make their notes for anything that they want changed. Some things to be aware of and pay attention to when, if you're sort of trying to decide who to work with for your audiobook production. Questions you'll want to ask. These will include when you ask what they think it will cost, if they give you a per finished hour amount, say, it's going to be, $750 per finished hour. Well, that is risky. And the per finished hour is very typical in our industry, but it's also risky for the author because you are not going to know what the project's going to cost you until it is done. And the truth is that a narrator, intentionally or not, may slow down during the course of the reading, or the estimate that they give you. Typically, most producers are giving, they just use 150 words per minute, but they don't actually test your narrative, your text, read it out loud for a couple of minutes and get a feel for whether it's really going to go at that pace. They're taking the shortcuts. And so I want you to be aware of that. So if they say it's a per finished hour and then the narrator slows down, well, the nice thing for the narrator is they get paid more. The not so nice thing for the client is you end up paying that extra that you weren't expecting, and they're not going to guarantee, right? Because they're giving a per finished hour. But there is an option. So some companies out there like Pro Audio Voices, we do a project basis. So we use our pre-production time and all the work that we do during that pre-production and casting to also clarify what the cost is going to be, what the scope of the project is. Are we adding in a full immersive soundscape and we're having, 30 different actors doing voices? That's going to be very different than the same length of book, but maybe single narrator, just a whole different, and no music and sound effects, right? So during that pre-production, we're mapping all of that out. We're getting very clear, and then we can offer a project cost without having to buffer in several $1,000s additional to make sure that we're covered no matter how, even if the narrator slows down. So it's that thoughtful preparation, again, that's going to come back and save you at that point. So the takeaway from that is, if you're out there talking to other producers, ask them what the cost basis is. Is it per finished hour? Is it a project cost? How does that work? Another thing you'll want to be asking is, what about changes that you might want to have made? Let's say you hear your audiobook and you go, dang, that paragraph right there, I could write it so much better. It's just it's clunky, it could be so much better. What will that company do if you come back with something like that? Will they allow you to make the change? It is logical and appropriate that they would charge you for a change of the text afterwards, but will they even permit it? So that's another question. Other things that are a little more nuanced might be things like, well, that character they were supposed to whisper there. They didn't really whisper at all, or they're shouting and they sound like they're whispering, what? So what about changes like that? Will those kinds of changes be accommodated in the process? Those are a couple of the things that you really want to make sure that you ask about. And I've talked with a lot of authors who have come to us after having a not great experience somewhere else, where they were offered like 3 different voices and then they didn't like any of those voices, but they weren't given any additional options to that. So you want to find out, well, what are your options when it comes to casting? Now, if you're asking for something really very specific, let's say like, I really need like somebody with a Zimbabwean accent that also can do French accent. And when you're asking for something that is probably going to be hard to find, that would be a discussion to have up front with them about how realistic is that? How important is it? So we have had people come to us and authors who have said, well, I really want this like very specific district of like New Orleans, and that's what I want that actor to be able to do. And then listening to the auditions, what they heard was, oh, this person who doesn't have that precise accent, but their storytelling quality for my particular text is so much better. And they were happy to release the whole idea of the accent. It was still a Southern, but it wasn't that specific. So these are things that can come up, but it's really helpful to ask a little bit about the casting process, dive into what that would be for you. I want to talk a little bit about distribution. Do you have a question, Tamika? Yeah.
Yeah. So But just thinking about all that, because it's my book, it's my story, so I'm going to be the narrator.
Mm-hmm.
And I have wisdom, I have capabilities to the story I'm expressing and the people with my voice fluctuations, and did a little bit of acting in my younger days, but it's still in me. I'm coming back.
All right.
So I'm just thinking about how would I, because I'm going to be the narrator, it's just going to be me. The information you just told me, how do I go about it in that aspect? Especially because cost is the thing I'm really thinking about as I self-publish this book, and just, I want to get into that. Yes, that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what I'm thinking about. Like, how do I minimize costs? Are there different options as far as when it comes to cost? Because I have to be, everybody's not a physical book person. Like,
Right.
people are really on this audiobook thing. And so I want to do that because my book, I'm very intentional because of the nature of my book
Mm-hmm.
for it to be translated in Spanish. So eventually there'll be a Spanish audiobook as well. So what does that look like for me as the narrator with costs and things of that nature?
Yeah, great question. Yeah. So what we do is we will provide a home studio consultant. So that's somebody who's going to meet with you over Zoom, and then they'll talk with you about your space so they can help you determine what's going to be the best microphone and recording kit for you, help you identify what things you may be able to do in your space to help provide like more soft goods around you, sort of, like one of the classic great places to record is in a walk-in clothes closet with lots of clothes, because it really helps both keep external sounds out, but also makes the internal sound really good. And both of those are factors. And then they'll also teach you just the pieces you need to know about how to use the recording software. And that's what we call that a DAW, a DAW, Digital Audio Workstation. And that can be something like Audacity, which is a free platform. And they would just teach you how to use that so that you know, how do I do record? How do I cut in where I, left off if I stumble? How do I, what we call, bounce the files or save the files and send them to you? So we give you the support you need so that you know how to do your part, and then we take care of everything else. And just something that I want to sort of more generalized on author narration. It's really helpful having any kind of acting background, or having the background as a speaker, although that, interestingly, translates less well than the acting background. But it does help, because one of the things that you want to be careful about for, in general for authors, is that, remember that as a writer, we're developing a certain set of skills, and we might be a great writer. But that doesn't mean that you automatically, somehow, mystically accomplish, develop the performance skills at the same time, right? So that's a whole other thing. The keeping in mind that the best way to reach more people with your content, it's a good listener experience, because then your listeners are going to tell their friends, say, you got to listen to this audiobook. It is so great, right? That's what you want. And so that's why we put a lot of attention and focus on really creating the very best listener experience that we can. So for authors that may not have that kind of background or feel uncertain about being able to record their own audiobook, I just want to make it clear that you shouldn't feel in any way like it's a negative thing to have a professional narrate your material. It's a whole different set of skills. Tamika, unless you had any other questions, I'm going to jump in a little bit to.
No, I think that's good. You can go ahead and continue on, and
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the other thing I just wanted to, it's very much on my mind right now because, and I'll be fully upfront about it, is I am very unhappy with what's happening in our country right now. And part of my own activism and choices include being a conscious consumer. So what does that mean in the audiobook world? That means that I am choosing to not feed, as in my own, for myself, to not feed the second richest man in the United States, who is part of the oligarchy. I choose not to send my business to him and his company, Amazon. And so, but I'm not going to give up listening to audiobooks, right? And also, it's so important for us right now to support each other as creators. So this is a part of why we created Amplify Audiobooks. It's a distribution platform that is created to support authors and to create a great listener experience at the same time. So typically for an author, when you sell an audiobook on Amplify Audiobooks, you're going to earn 3 to 4 times what you would for the exact same sale, the exact same price if you sold it on Audible. 3 to 4 times. Just think about start adding up a few audiobook sales and how many more do you have to sell on Audible to make the same amount that you can on Amplify? And Amplify also gives the agency the tools to be able to effectively market their audiobooks. So you not only earn way more, but you also have you're able to put your audiobook on sale. You can do any kind of discount codes that you want. You will know who bought your audiobook. These are valuable things. And so that is something that we get on Amplify Audiobooks. And for listeners, for those of us who are, massive audiobook fans, knowing, making a conscious choice about where we're going to spend our dollars, this is something that we can do. It's an action. So when we stop putting it in the pockets of the billionaires and start putting it in the pockets of the creators, we are making a difference. And so I just wanted to highlight that because, like I said, it's very important to me, and I know it is important to a lot of us and to our country.
Definitively. Thank you so much for that. So a question would be, so if the author has their website,
Mm-hmm.
would it anyway be connected to the author's website, or does everything specific? Is it like you create an account with Amplify with your organization, and so everything will be funneled that way, and so you have to go about it that way? Or is there any way that that connects to the website?
That's a great question. So yes, it does connect to your website, and it's important that it do so. So again, your website is your marketing hub, right? So on your website, when you have your book, your audiobook, your ebook, you're directing traffic, really. So they come to your website, they go, oh, I want that audiobook. And they click the button to go buy it. Where are you sending them? This is where, as authors, we're making that conscious choice. Where are we sending them? So many authors just default to, they just assume, well, everybody's on Audible. Everybody's an Audible subscriber. It's not true. It's not true. And many of us are like deliberately, consciously choosing to not be there, right? So make a conscious choice. Send them to your Amplify Audiobooks page. So what you get as an author on Amplify, you will have an account with us. You'll have a dashboard where you can track all the things, do all the things that you want to do. And it's sort of a little bit like the Etsy of audiobooks. In other words, it's like your store, your audiobook store is in the mall of Amplify Audiobooks. Okay. And that way you can have all those tools. The thing about audiobooks is they're not a single easy product like a print book is. You just pick up the book and you can sell it. Ebook, simple digital product, one file. And an audiobook, it's a whole bunch of files in a playlist that's going to play in the right order with a cover image attached. It's a complicated thing. And so in order to have a good experience as a listener, you're going to need to use an app that will deliver that experience. That's why with Audible, audiobooks.com, any number of, audiobook retailers, they will each have an app so that you can listen in the app. But it is a direct sale. It's just you're in the context of a store, of a mall, where there are other audiobooks. And the great thing for authors about that is that increases your discoverability. Less so with places, the really huge retailers like Audible, because there are so many. No one's going to really find yours unless you send them there, which is mostly what marketing is all about anyway, right? It's about directing traffic and helping your listeners find you and find your audiobook. So the marketing is always an important piece, but especially, right now, Amplify Audiobooks, it is a smaller platform. That's true. It's in its beginning phases, and we're growing quickly, and it's exciting. We're building community. We're not just selling subscriptions. We don't even have a subscriptions right now. And it's all about keeping the author in the driver's seat and making sure that they're getting their fair share of each sale.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being with me. And I see that our time is up, but so glad you came with a couple questions, and I hope that was really useful.
Thank you. It was. I just tried to work on getting in contact to maybe consult with somebody to see what those next steps would look like and be, because I know that this is a necessity, and I know I'm familiar with me that it would aid to bring my book to life in another way from just the whole essence and character of who Tamika L. Herbert is.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I invite you to reach out to us at proaudiovoices.com and just hit the get started. You can schedule a call with one of us and we'll take it from there.
Awesome sauce. Thank you, Kylie.
Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. I hope that was helpful. Thank you again for joining me today. We'll catch you next week on Audiobook Connection. Meanwhile, if you have questions about audiobook or podcast production, distribution, or marketing, we hope you'll join us at proaudiovoices.com, where you can schedule a call to discuss your project. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.